They laughed when I showed up with my torn boots and rusted fishing rod. The town's rich boys tossed coins at me like I was entertainment. Dance, fisherman, dance. But I wasn't there to beg. I was there to breathe, to survive, to remember what my father lost. My name's Eli Parker. I wasn't born poor. I was made poor by betrayal. The same neighborhood that now mocks me once belonged to my family, until it was snatched. My father was a fisherman too. But he wasn't just catching fish. He was fighting storms to keep our dignity afloat. I was 12 when our house was auctioned right in front of us. Mom held my hand so tightly it turned blue. Dad stood silent, jaw clenched, as neighbors whispered how we were finally getting what we deserved. We moved to a shack by the lake where the roof leaked and winters froze our bones. But even then, Dad would rise at 4 a.m., row out to fish, and still come back with a smile. He told me, "We lost everything, Eli, but we still have our name. Don't ever lose that." I watched that neighborhood from afar for years. The lights, the parties, the people who once pretended we didn't exist. They never saw the quiet boy at the lake, watching with eyes full of fire. Every insult, every eviction notice, every empty dinner plate became part of me. I didn't cry. I calculated. I didn't scream. I studied. By 15, I was learning business from library books while fixing nets for tips. One night, a rich man's son threw my tackle box into the lake. I dived after it, freezing, choking. He laughed from the dock. "You're nothing but lake trash." That night, I made myself a promise. One day, I would own the dock, the lake, and every house around it, and when that day came, they'd remember the name they tried to bury. Eli was only a child when everything turned to dust. He didn't understand eviction notices or court orders. He just saw his mother cry. And to a child, a mother's tears feel like the world breaking apart. His backpack was full of broken pencils and quiet dreams. While other kids brought lunchboxes, Eli brought silence and stitched up shame. He sat at the back of the class, hoping to disappear, hoping no one would notice his hunger. At recess, kids whispered behind cupped hands. His dad lost everything, they said, giggling as if ruin was contagious. Eli didn't fight back. He just stared at the grass, cheeks burning. One winter morning, Eli wore mismatched gloves, one pink, one brown. A girl pointed and laughed, and everyone joined in like it was sport. But Eli only smiled weakly, saying, "They're warm. That's all that matters." His innocence wasn't just in his words, it was in how he forgave. Even those who hurt him the most, he still greeted with kindness. He believed people would change, because his heart had never known cruelty. He gave fish to those who mocked. Him, wrapped in old newspapers, still warm. Some took it out of guilt, others out of pity, but none ever said thank you. Still, Eli smiled like it was the best trade in the world. At night, he'd kneel beside the cold wooden floor and pray. "God, help them be nice tomorrow," he'd whisper, not for himself, but for them. It wasn't strength, it was innocence dressed as faith. He once caught the biggest fish of the season and gave it away. A single mother needed dinner for her kids, and Eli didn't hesitate. To him, hunger wasn't a stranger. It was a brother he knew well. But no one noticed when he walked home alone with empty hands. No one saw the way he kept his smile stitched even when it trembled. Eli had the kind of innocence that softened hate without even trying. When a stray dog showed up at his door, thin and shaking, Eli shared his last meal. He named him Buddy, and they kept each other warm through harsh nights. One boy and one dog, both unwanted, both survivors. Eli didn't dream of revenge back then. He dreamed of being someone worth remembering. Not for what he owned, but for how he loved. Even the lake seemed to understand his pain. Its waves were gentler when Eli rode through it at dawn. It mirrored his soul, quiet, deep, and full of unspoken sadness. That lake became his escape, his friend, his world. He'd talk to it like it could listen, like it could hug him back. And in some way, maybe it did. Maybe it carried his sorrows beneath its surface. Eli had always been a quiet observer of life, a boy who believed in simple truths like fairness and kindness. But that was before the world taught him something he wasn't prepared for. Before, the harsh reality of life's broken promises slammed into him like a storm he couldn't outrun. When Eli turned 16, everything changed in an instant. It wasn't just the first taste of true loss. It was the sudden rush of clarity. He'd always been the underdog, the kid who waited for his turn at life, but now, something inside him shifted. It was a summer day, the kind that carried the scent of change. Eli had been fishing, just like he always did, quietly, peacefully, finding solace in the rhythm of the lake. But this time, as he pulled in his line, he caught more than just a fish. A group of young men had arrived by the shore, loud and rowdy, like a pack of wolves. They called Eli's fishing spot the poor man's pond, and laughed as they set up their gear. But then one of them tossed a rock, aiming for Eli's boat, shattering the calm. Eli's pulse quickened, his heart hammering. For the first time, he felt the sting of injustice, real, personal, and raw. He wasn't just being bullied anymore. He was being pushed, tested, forced to face the demons he had ignored for so long. The next moments passed in a blur of anger and confusion. He wanted to shout back, to confront them with everything he had held inside for years, but instead, he stood there speechless, holding onto his fishing rod like it was the last thing that tethered him to his sanity. As the boys laughed and taunted him, something deep within Eli cracked open. It wasn't a breaking moment. It was a revelation. He understood for the first time that kindness alone wasn't enough to make the world right. The world wasn't fair. It wasn't kind. And no matter how hard you tried to be good, there were people out there who would never care. But something else happened in that moment, too. Something that changed Eli's trajectory forever. He realized he didn't have to be a passive victim. He didn't have to wait for the world to notice his goodness. He could take control of his destiny. The next morning, Eli woke up with a fire in his chest. For the first time in his life, he knew what he wanted, to rise above the things that held him back, to become more than just the boy everyone overlooked, to be someone who could command respect, not because of force, but because of what he achieved. He spent the following years learning, grinding, and slowly accumulating the skills that would shape his future. But he also made sure to never forget the lesson the world had taught him. People didn't care about your struggles unless you could prove your worth. Kindness wasn't enough. Action was the answer. Eli threw himself into business, taking small jobs where he could find them, working on the docks, selling fish to local markets, learning the art of trade. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was preparing for something bigger. The moral awakening wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. Eli understood that to change his circumstances, he couldn't fight fire with fire. Instead, he would be like the river. He would rise above the chaos, carving his own path, flowing where others could not follow. By his late 20s, Eli had begun building a small business around his fishing knowledge. It wasn't much at first, just a few clients, some small contracts, but he never stopped. Every failure became fuel for his fire, every setback a lesson to be learned. But it wasn't just business that Eli was mastering. He was also mastering his mind, shedding the remnants of the boy who had once believed kindness was enough. He learned to be strategic, to make calculated decisions that didn't rely on chance. He understood that success didn't come from being nice. It came from being smart. One fateful day, Eli found himself standing before a wealthy investor, someone who had the resources to take his dream to the next level. It was a moment that could change everything, but it was also a test of his moral integrity. The investor made an offer. Eli could take the money, but it would mean abandoning his commitment to sustainability and fair wages for his employees. It was a defining moment. Eli remembered the years of struggle, the tears, the hunger, the broken dreams. He remembered the people who had mocked him, the ones who had told him he'd never amount to anything. It would be so easy to say yes, to take the money and run, to betray everything he believed in for a chance at wealth. But something inside him clicked. He realized the price of success wasn't worth losing who he was. So, it's what got me this far, and it's what will keep me going. That decision marked the beginning of Eli's rise to success. Over the next few years, his business flourished, but not at the cost of his values. He treated his employees with respect, paid fair wages, and focused on sustainability, principles that had once seemed impossible to uphold, but now were the bedrock of his empire. As Eli's wealth grew, so did his reputation. He became known not only as a successful businessman, but as a man who had stayed true to his roots. The quiet fisherman had become a billionaire, but he hadn't sacrificed his soul along the way. He bought the lake. He turned it into a sanctuary, a place for others to find peace just like he had. And the boys who had once thrown rocks at him? They were left watching from the shore, unable to even step foot on the land he had claimed. The rain poured down like a curtain between Eli and the world, hiding his tears as he sat alone by the lake. His hands trembled around the old fishing rod, broken, bent, but still clutched like it was his only memory of peace. This wasn't just any lake. It was the last place he saw his father smile before life crumbled beneath them. Back then, they were poor but proud, his father's hands rough from nets, his spirit unshaken. Eli remembered those evenings when they didn't have dinner, but they had stories, and they had hope, even if it was fading fast like the light on the water. He stared into the ripples and saw his younger self, quiet, invisible, always waiting to be chosen. But the world never chose him. It only punished him for existing. His crime? Being poor, being quiet, being kind. He still remembered the day the officer came, ticket book in hand, eyes cold like the water's edge. Fishing without a license, he said, even though Eli's bucket had barely 2 fish. Eli's voice cracked as he tried to explain, but the fine was written and his dignity torn. He had walked home that day barefoot because his slippers had broken and he couldn't afford another pair. His mother didn't scold him. She just hugged him silently, tears soaking into his shoulder. That night, he lay awake wondering how the world could be so cruel to someone who had so little. Years passed, but that pain never left. He grew stronger, but never forgot the sting of being pushed aside. And tonight, standing at the lake's edge, it all came rushing back. But this time, he wasn't the boy with the broken rod. He was the man who had bought the entire shoreline. He wasn't here to fish. He was here to remember. A crowd had gathered behind him. Local reporters, community leaders, the same officers who once fined him. Eli didn't speak right away. He just looked at the water, letting it calm his breath. Then he turned, voice steady, and told them what this place really meant. "This isn't just a lake," he said. "It's where I learned how to survive. It's where I learned that silence can speak louder than screams. And it's where I realized that pain doesn't have to destroy you, it can build you." The crowd was silent, many with tears in their eyes, others unable to meet his gaze. Eli spotted the same officer who once fined him, now older, humbled, shifting uncomfortably. He didn't point fingers. He didn't seek revenge. He just kept speaking. "I forgive you," Eli said, looking straight at the man. "Not because it was okay, but because I refuse to carry that pain anymore." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the lake seemed to pause with him. Then Eli reached into his coat and pulled out the original fine, still creased, still painful. He held it high, then slowly dropped it into the water. The paper soaked, sank, and vanished, like the anger he had finally let go. The emotional weight lifted as he watched it disappear. In its place rose something new, something beautiful. Peace. A rare, priceless thing for a boy who once had nothing. His mother stood at the edge of the crowd, hands over her mouth, sobbing with pride. Eli walked over, hugged her tight, and whispered, "We're home now." She nodded, whispering back, "You brought us here, baby. You did it." This was no longer just a victory. It was a moment of healing. For him, for her, and for every forgotten child like he once was. And in that moment, Eli didn't feel rich because of his money. He felt rich because he never lost his heart. Long before Eli became the name behind billion-dollar ventures, he was just a son who hid hunger behind smiles. He never told his mother when he skipped meals so she could eat. He just said he wasn't hungry. She'd kiss his forehead, whispering thanks to God, never knowing her son went to bed with a hollow stomach. His sacrifice was silent, never loud, never praised. He walked miles to school with torn shoes so his little sister could have the better pair. When her friends mocked her, Eli stood behind the trees, making sure she got home safe. No one saw the night he sold his only birthday gift, a fishing rod, to pay for her medicine. He had waited years for it, saved every coin. But she had a fever and he had no choice. He didn't cry. He just watched her sleep that night, forehead cool, heart warm. His classmates laughed at his ragged clothes, but they never knew he was working after school to pay off a loan. While other kids played, he scrubbed dishes in silence, not for glory, but to keep their lights on. When teachers asked why his homework was late, he smiled and said, "Just tired, sir." He never told anyone about the nights he slept on the floor so his mother's back wouldn't ache. He gave her his only blanket during winter, then tucked his arms close and shivered quietly. She never knew, because Eli never let her know. When his sister got into college, the fees were too high, so Eli quit his job at the corner store and found night work loading trucks. Dangerous, brutal, exhausting. He didn't even go to her graduation. He was too busy paying for it. Even as success came closer, his sacrifices deepened in silence. He turned down his first luxury car to send money to a neighbor whose child needed surgery. No cameras, no posts, just an envelope left on their doorstep. The world saw a calm, driven man, unshakable. But inside, Eli carried decades of pain, choices no one clapped for, nights no one witnessed, and he carried them all with grace, never once asking for thanks. At his first press conference, when a journalist asked who inspired him most, he simply said, "My mom." But in his heart, he meant, everyone I gave to quietly, without asking for anything in return. That was his truth. His legacy wasn't in headlines. It was in hidden, holy sacrifices. Even now, as CEO, Eli still drives past the old grocery store where he mopped floors at 15. He pauses. Not for nostalgia, but to remind himself. He once gave everything for people who never knew. And that is why he stands tall. Not because he conquered the world, but because he carried it silently. Eli never forgot the night he heard his mother crying behind the kitchen door. She thought he was asleep, but he was wide awake, his fists clenched, heartbreaking. That night, he promised himself, "I'll never let her cry out of helplessness again." From that day on, his quiet nature turned to a quiet fire. He didn't speak much, but his eyes started saying everything. "I'll protect them. I'll fight for them." Every insult, every slap of poverty, he took it like armor, not a wound. When the landlord threatened to throw them out, Eli didn't beg. He stood straight, looked him in the eye, and said, "Give me a week." He worked 20 hours a day that week and paid every cent. His little sister once came home crying, bullied at school for being poor. Eli didn't storm into school. He didn't yell. Instead, he gave her his lunch and told her she was the smartest girl alive, and that one day they'd beg her for a job. He was still a teenager when he started guarding his family like a soldier. When their neighbor accused his mother of stealing food, Eli didn't explode. He took the blame, then brought home groceries the next day without a word. As years passed, Eli's strength grew not just in muscle, but in silence. He didn't chase fights. He ended them. And not with violence, but with the kind of respect that made people lower their voices around him. When he started building his business, it wasn't about fame or money. It was about walls, strong, unshakable walls that no storm could bring down around his family again. He built those walls with sweat, sacrifice, and a promise. No one will hurt them again. Ever. When the bank said no, he said, "Watch me." When investors laughed at the fisherman with a plan, he worked through nights until his hands bled. He didn't care about being underestimated. He cared about being unstoppable. Even after he became CEO, Eli kept the same fire. Security cameras, bodyguards. They weren't for him. They were for the ones who still needed protection. His mother never had to look over her shoulder again. When a developer tried to buy out the neighborhood lake, the one his father fished in, Eli bought the whole property, not out of pride, but preservation. He wanted every kid like him to feel safe by the water. "No one will take this from them," he said, voice calm, eyes burning. Every move Eli made wasn't just success, it was a shield, a roof for the homeless, a scholarship for the voiceless, a warning to the powerful. Don't touch what I love. He wasn't just building wealth. He was building a fortress around hearts that once broke, and he stood watch every day, not with weapons, but with will, because Eli wasn't made from power. He was made from protection, and the ones he loved, they never had to fear again. Years later, the same people who once mocked Eli began showing up in polished suits. Their tone had changed. No more smirks, only handshakes and hopeful glances. But Eli could still hear their old laughter echoing in his memory. The man who once fined him for fishing stood at his office door one morning. Time had turned him gray and tired, but arrogance still lingered in his eyes. "I'm here to discuss a deal," he said, as if the past had never happened. Eli didn't throw him out. Instead, he offered a chair, calm and unreadable, like always. But inside, his heart wrestled between justice and mercy. The man spoke of investors, profits, and development plans for the neighborhood. He never once said sorry. But when Eli mentioned the lake, his expression shifted, briefly, into shame. "You used to fish there," the man said. Quietly, Eli nodded. "You fined me for feeding my family." There was silence, thick, heavy, full of what should have been said long ago. That night, Eli sat alone by that same lake. No suit, no bodyguards, no boardrooms, just the wind and memories. He thought about the younger version of himself, barefoot and hopeful. He remembered how he once hated that man, how he dreamed of revenge, of making them feel small. But now, all he felt was tired. He knew that becoming what they were would make him lose who he was, so he forgave. Not for them, but for himself. Because carrying rage was heavier than poverty had ever been. Redemption didn't come through a grand apology or public tears. It came when Eli funded a free fishing program for local kids. No permits, no punishments. Just peace. And the old man came one day with his grandson. He didn't say much, just watched the boy cast a line into the water. But his eyes, once cold, now held quiet regret. Eli walked over and handed the boy a new fishing rod. "He won't get fined," he said with a faint smile. The man lowered his head, whispering, "Thank you for not becoming like me." That moment wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic, but it was everything Eli had worked for. Not revenge, redemption. He didn't need apologies. He needed the cycle to break, the pain to stop with him. And in that silence, it did. Eli stood before the Council of Wealthy Land, developers who once controlled everything. They didn't know who the new investor was, only that he'd bought the entire lakeside property. As he walked into the boardroom, silence rippled like a storm was about to break. He laid the deed to the lake on the polished mahogany table. Gasps filled the room as powerful men recognized the name on the document, Eli Raymond. The same quiet boy they had laughed off their docks. Years ago. Impossible, one of them whispered, flipping through the pages. This must be a mistake, and he was just a fisherman. But Eli's voice was calm, low, and powerful. I still am. One of them leaned forward nervously. What? Do you plan to do with the land? Eli smiled slightly. Something none of you ever did. Give back. They expected revenge, fences, lawsuits, public humiliation. Instead, Eli unveiled plans for a public eco-village, free school, and fishing reserve. Everything they never imagined someone like him could build. That night, word spread fast about the fisherman who now owned the lake. Reporters showed up. So did families. Former bullies stayed hidden behind curtains. But the people? They came in floods, holding his story like it was hope. And then came the twist. A major investor threatened to back out, claiming the plan wasn't profitable enough. It was Eli's biggest deal yet. Millions on the line. Everyone expected him to fold, to play safe. But Eli stood tall, staring straight into the camera during the press conference. If helping my community makes me lose a deal, then let it be. That one sentence made headlines. Fisherman turns down fortune to build dreams. Overnight, donations poured in from across the nation. Single mothers, retired vets, even children with lemonade stands sent what they could. People didn't just believe in his project. They believed in him. The suspense climaxed when city officials tried blocking his permits at the last minute. Old enemies in politics rose from the shadows. But this time, Eli had something stronger than silence. He had the public. Thousands gathered at City Hall, holding signs that read, "Let Eli build. Justice for the fishermen. Our lake, our story." It was no longer about land. It was about redemption, unity, and power earned through pain. As the final vote was cast and the permit approved, Eli walked out not as a billionaire, but as a symbol of how deep wounds can build bridges. If the heart is brave enough. He returned to the lake one morning before sunrise, casting a line into the water, just like the old days. This time, children sat beside him, not scared, not silenced, but dreaming. Because one man, once broken, rose. Not by stepping on others, but by lifting them. Years had passed since Eli had taken control of the lake, and now, every morning, his hands no longer trembled with doubt. He stood by the water's edge, watching as children swam and played in the same lake he once fished, alone. The neighborhood had transformed, from neglected land to a thriving community where new businesses flourished and families found peace. There was a sense of togetherness in the air, something Eli had never imagined possible. The media came and went, but Eli never sought the spotlight again. He focused on what mattered: the people, the environment, the legacy he was building. It was the kind of change no one saw coming, not even him. Every time a child laughed as they caught a fish, Eli felt his heart swell. He knew the lake was no longer just a body of water. It was life itself. It was a reminder that everything he had fought for was worth it. The wealth had come in droves. But Eli learned early on that money wasn't the true treasure. It was the bonds he forged. His wealth was no longer measured in dollars, but in smiles, in gratitude, in the knowledge that he had given people something real. And then came the day he received a letter from the mayor, an invitation to meet at the city council, a celebration for all he had achieved. A public thank you. Eli hesitated. His instinct was to stay behind the scenes, but he knew this moment was bigger than him. Standing before the crowd, Eli spoke softly, yet with purpose. "I'm not here because I want praise. I'm here because, together, we've proven something. The audience leaned in, hanging on every word. We've shown that one person, one dream, can change the world. And you all helped me do that. The cheers that followed were deafening. The applause wasn't for his wealth, his title, or his success. It was for the impact he had made, how he had given hope to the hopeless and strength to the weak. As Eli left the podium, he glanced out. At the lake one last time, and in the reflection of the sun-dappled water, he saw more than just a man. He saw a symbol of possibility, a beacon that no dream, no matter how impossible, should ever be abandoned. He had gone from being an invisible fisherman to being the heart of a thriving community, and in that moment, he understood something profound. True success wasn't in what you had, it was in what you gave. The final lesson he had learned was this: we are not defined by where we start, but by where we choose to go. And sometimes it's the most unexpected journeys that lead to the greatest transformations. With that thought in his heart, Eli smiled, knowing his story would continue to inspire generations. A quiet fisherman. Now the billionaire who owns the lake,